Chapter I, The Smoke That Spoke of Nothing. It was a bitterly cold morning in early February when I found Sherlock Holmes crouched in his dressing gown before the hearth at 221B Baker Street, feeding the fire with deliberate care. Outside, the London fog rolled thick along the street, like the restless breath of some unseen beast. It was the sort of morning that wrapped itself about the city's shoulders with dreary familiarity, a morning tailor-made for introspection. Or idleness. Holmes, of course, chose neither. "You will observe," he said without looking up, "that the quality of ash can reveal far more than the average constable might care to consider." I glanced toward the low-burning flames, where the embers hissed as Holmes prodded a fresh log into place. "Is this a commentary on the morning paper?" I asked lightly, "or a prelude to something more sinister?" He smiled faintly and gestured toward a small envelope resting on the mantelpiece. "The paper will keep. That, however, arrived not half an hour ago, and I dare say it will interest you more than any editorial on parliamentary bickering." I took up the envelope. It was of thick ivory stock and sealed with a plain red wax no-crest, no marking. Inside was a brief note, written in an elegant hand. "Mr. Holmes, I require your assistance in a matter of great urgency and discretion. A fire occurred last night at my residence, but it is not the flames I fear, only the silence that followed. I shall call upon you at 11. Miss Althea Venn." "Odd," I murmured. "A fire that leaves behind silence. Do you know the name?" Holmes stood and brushed the ash from his fingers. "Miss Althea Venn, only daughter of the late Professor Gerald Venn, noted physiologist at King's College. Her father died 2 years ago, but she still resides in his former home, St. Augustine's Row, near Bloomsbury. I recall his lectures were once the terror of my medical class," I said with a smile. "Indeed. And I recall he kept one of the most extensive private libraries on anatomical anomalies in England," Holmes replied. "Curious that the daughter of such a mind should call upon me for a fire. But she does not ask about the fire itself," I said slowly, rereading the letter. "She fears the silence after." "That's a peculiar way of putting it." "Precisely, Watson. And when someone expresses fear not at the chaos, but at the absence that follows it, well, it suggests to me that something or someone has gone missing." Holmes turned as a knock came at the door, as punctual as the toll of a watchtower bell. 11 o'clock, he said. "Let us meet Miss Venn." Mrs. Hudson ushered in a slender woman of perhaps 30, clad in a dark green coat with brass buttons and gloves faintly singed at the fingertips. Her auburn hair was drawn back from a pale, intelligent face, and her blue eyes held a tension that had nothing to do with the February cold. "Miss Venn," Holmes greeted her, gesturing to the fireside chair. "Dr. Watson, my colleague. You wrote of a fire. Please tell us everything." She sat with a poise born of education, yet her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I hope I have not come in vain. I did not know where else to turn. The constables have dismissed it as a mere accident. And yet," she paused, eyes fixed on the fire. "There was a blaze in my father's study last night," she began, "at precisely 1 o'clock, and the morning I was woken by the scent of smoke. I rushed downstairs alone, for I live with only a maid, and she was out visiting her sister in Chiswick. The door to the study was ajar. Inside, the curtains were aflame, and smoke filled the room. I managed to smother the blaze with blankets and water from the scullery. Though much of the carpet and bookshelves were ruined, Holmes steepled his fingers. "And you believe the fire was not accidental?" Her voice dropped. "There was nothing to burn?" "That room, my father's study, has been untouched since his passing. I never enter it. There is no hearth in there, no lamp left burning, no candles. And when I doused the flames and searched for the cause, I found nothing at all. No trace of a fallen ember, no oil or spilled wax, no broken pipe. Only a window that had been unlatched from within." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Had you locked it the day before?" "I hadn't touched it in months." Watson leaned forward. "Might someone have gained entrance?" I do not know. There was no sign of theft, but something was missing. A volume, one of my father's old journals." Now Holmes stirred. "What journal, Miss Venn?" Her lips tightened. "A private one. I never read it fully, only enough to know it concerned his research into human perception abnormalities, of sensation, and the psychology of fear." "Was it valuable?" "Not in a monetary sense, but to him it was priceless. He called it the Umber Codex." I glanced at Holmes. His expression had sharpened, like a blade turned toward the light. "Miss Venn," he said gently, "this is no longer a matter for the local constables. This is theft by fire, a crime cloaked in destruction. You said nothing of this to the police?" She shook her head. "They dismissed the incident within minutes. Said the smoke likely came from a loose gas fitting, and that I must have imagined the missing book. I knew then they would not listen." "Then I shall," Holmes said, rising to retrieve his coat and hat. "If you will accompany us back to St. Augustine's Row, I should like to see the scene for myself." Miss Venn stood, her eyes brightening. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes." As we descended the steps of Baker Street and stepped into the wintry fog, Holmes murmured, "There is something deeply theatrical about a fire that burns in a sealed room, consumes no accelerant, and leaves behind an absence rather than a clue." We climbed into a cab, the horses clopping steadily as the fog thickened. St. Augustine's Row came into view, a street of aging Georgian townhouses, their shutters drawn like heavy eyelids against the mist. Miss Venn led us into a narrow hallway, the scent of smoke still clinging to the air. The study was just as she described: charred shelves, blackened drapes, and a lingering echo of heat. Holmes moved through it like a priest surveying sacred ruins, touching nothing yet seeing everything. "Watson," he said, gesturing to a broken floorboard beneath the shelves. "Note the soot pattern. The flames rose inward, not outward. Someone lit the fire from beneath the window?" I asked. "Or beneath the very shelves themselves," Holmes muttered. "Miss Venn, was there ever a fireplace in this room that has since been closed?" "No, never." Holmes crouched and peered beneath the scorched curtain rod. No sign of a draft. "Yet look here, a fragment of cloth caught on the window latch, and the impression on the sill someone exited through this window, despite its height." "Whoever it was," I said, "wanted the journal and lit the fire as a distraction, or as a symbol," Holmes said. "One meant for her, not for the police. There's more to this than arson, Watson. There's message in the smoke." He turned to Miss Venn. "You said the book's title was the Umber Codex. Might you recall its final entry?" She hesitated. "Only a phrase. That which cannot be unseen will one day be forgotten but never forgiven. Holmes's smile was as faint as it was unsettling. Excellent. Then we must ask ourselves who wishes to remember the unseeable and who fears its rediscovery. With that cryptic remark, he turned toward the door, and I knew our descent into the fire's mystery had only just begun. Chapter 2. A stranger in the smoke. The gray morning deepened into the more definite shades of noon as we concluded our inspection of the fire-damaged study. Holmes remained for nearly half an hour in deep silence, examining the burnt debris with careful precision, sifting through the scorched remains of Professor Venn's once pristine bookcases, the charred fragments of old scientific treatises, and the blackened threads of the curtain that had been the most visible victim of the flames. His sharp gaze missed nothing, and I knew better than to interrupt him while he was in such a state. Miss Althea Venn stood near the doorway, her gloved hands clasped in front of her. Her face was pale with fatigue, but not with fear. There was something beneath her composure, a kind of simmering resolve that I suspected she had inherited from her father. She watched Holmes without speaking, though I could tell she was desperate for answers. At length, Holmes stood up, brushing ash from his knees. He moved to the edge of the room where the shelves had once stood in ordered precision, and now slumped like the ribs of a burned-out ship. "Miss Venn," he said, "you mentioned that you rarely entered this room." "That is correct." It was always my father's domain. After his passing, I had it locked for some months. It felt wrong to disturb his work, but the lock has not been forced. No, I still have the only key. Holmes took a turn about the room, his brow furrowed. "Tell me more of your father's journal, the Umbra Codex. Was it kept in this study?" "Yes, it was always in the locked case in that corner." She pointed to the left of the fireplace, where a tall glass-fronted cabinet now stood askew and empty. He once told me it was the culmination of 10 years' research notes, theories, even private experiments, but he never allowed anyone to read it. When I asked, he would grow quite withdrawn. Did he have enemies or rivals? She hesitated. None that I know of. My father had strong views and a biting tongue in academic circles, but after his retirement he withdrew almost entirely from society. He rarely even left the house. He spent his last years corresponding with a handful of foreign scholars, mostly in Prague, and once, I believe, in Cairo. Holmes turned sharply. "Cairo? Yes, I only know because of the stamps. I asked once, and he said something about visions and darkness, which made little sense to me." Chapter I. The smoke that spoke of nothing. It was a bitterly cold morning in early February when I found Sherlock Holmes crouched in his dressing gown before the hearth at 221B Baker Street, feeding the fire with deliberate care. Outside, the London fog rolled thick along the street, like the restless breath of some unseen beast. It was the sort of morning that wrapped itself about the city's shoulders with dreary familiarity, a morning tailor-made for introspection or idleness. Holmes, of course, chose neither. "You will observe," he said without looking up, "that the quality of ash can reveal far more than the average constable might care to consider." I glanced toward the low-burning flames, where the embers hissed as Holmes prodded a fresh log into place. "Is this a commentary on the morning paper?" I asked lightly, "or a prelude to something more sinister?" He smiled faintly and gestured toward a small envelope resting on the mantelpiece. The paper will keep. That, however, arrived not half an hour ago, and I dare say it will interest you more than any editorial on parliamentary bickering. I took up the envelope. It was of thick ivory stock and sealed with a plain red wax, no crest, no marking. Inside was a brief note, written in an elegant hand. Mr. Holmes, I require your assistance in a matter of great urgency and discretion. A fire occurred last night at my residence, but it is not the flames I fear, only the silence that followed. I shall call upon you at 11. Miss Althea Venn. Odd, I murmured. A fire that leaves behind silence. Do you know the name? Holmes stood and brushed the ash from his fingers. Miss Althea Venn, only daughter of the late Professor Gerald Venn, noted physiologist at King's College. Her father died 2 years ago, but she still resides in his former home, St. Augustine's Row, near Bloomsbury. I recall his lectures were once the terror of my medical class, I said with a smile. Indeed. And I recall he kept one of the most extensive private libraries on anatomical anomalies in England, Holmes replied. Curious that the daughter of such a mind should call upon me for a fire. But she does not ask about the fire itself, I said slowly, rereading the letter. She fears the silence after. That's a peculiar way of putting it. Precisely, Watson. And when someone expresses fear not at the chaos, but at the absence that follows it, well, it suggests to me that something or someone has gone missing. Holmes turned as a knock came at the door, as punctual as the toll of a watchtower bell. 11 o'clock, he said. Let us meet Miss Venn. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a slender woman of perhaps 30, clad in a dark green coat with brass buttons and gloves faintly singed at the fingertips. Her auburn hair was drawn back from a pale, intelligent face, and her blue eyes held a tension that had nothing to do with the February cold. Miss Venn, Holmes greeted her, gesturing to the fireside chair. Dr. Watson, my colleague. You wrote of a fire. Please tell us everything. She sat with a poise born of education, yet her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I hope I have not come in vain. I did not know where else to turn. The constables have dismissed it as a mere accident. And yet, she paused, eyes fixed on the fire. There was a blaze in my father's study last night, she began. At precisely 1 o'clock in the morning, I was woken by the scent of smoke. I rushed downstairs alone, for I live with only a maid, and she was out visiting her sister in Chiswick. The door to the study was ajar. Inside, the curtains were aflame, and smoke filled the room. I managed to smother the blaze with blankets and water from the scullery. Though much of the carpet and bookshelves were ruined, Holmes steepled his fingers. And you believe the fire was not accidental? Her voice dropped. There was nothing to burn. That room, my father's study, has been untouched since his passing. I never enter it. There is no hearth in there, no lamp left burning, no candles. And when I doused the flames and searched for the cause, I found nothing at all. No trace of a fallen ember, no oil or spilled wax, no broken pipe. Only a window that had been unlatched from within. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Had you locked it the day before? I hadn't touched it in months. Watson leaned forward. Might someone have gained entrance? I do not know. There was no sign of theft, but something was missing. A volume, one of my father's old journals. Now Holmes stirred. What journal, Miss Venn? Her lips tightened. A private one. I never read it fully, only enough to know it concerned his research into human perception abnormalities, of sensation, and the psychology of fear. Was it valuable? Not in a monetary sense, but to him it was priceless. He called it the Umber Codex. I glanced at Holmes. His expression had sharpened, like a blade turned toward the light. "Miss Venn," he said gently, "this is no longer a matter for the local constables. This is theft by fire, a crime cloaked in destruction. You said nothing of this to the police?" She shook her head. "They dismissed the incident within minutes. Said the smoke likely came from a loose gas fitting, and that I must have imagined the missing book. I knew then they would not listen." "Then I shall," Holmes said, rising to retrieve his coat and hat. "If you will accompany us back to St. Augustine's Row, I should like to see the scene for myself." Miss Venn stood, her eyes brightening. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes." As we descended the steps of Baker Street and stepped into the wintry fog, Holmes murmured, "There is something deeply theatrical about a fire that burns in a sealed room, consumes no accelerant, and leaves behind an absence rather than a clue." We climbed into a cab, the horses clopping steadily as the fog thickened. St. Augustine's Row came into view, a street of aging Georgian townhouses, their shutters drawn like heavy eyelids against the mist. Miss Venn led us into a narrow hallway, the scent of smoke still clinging to the air. The study was just as she described: charred shelves, blackened drapes, and the lingering echo of heat. Holmes moved through it like a priest surveying sacred ruins, touching nothing yet seeing everything. "Watson," he said, gesturing to a broken floorboard beneath the shelves. "Note the soot pattern. The flames rose inward, not outward. Someone lit the fire from beneath the window?" I asked. "Or beneath the very shelves themselves," Holmes muttered. "Miss Venn, was there ever a fireplace in this room that has since been closed?" "No, never." Holmes crouched and peered beneath the scorched curtain rod. No sign of a draft. "Yet look here, a fragment of cloth caught on the window latch, and the impression on the sill someone exited through this window, despite its height." "Whoever it was," I said, "wanted the journal and lit the fire as a distraction." "Or as a symbol," Holmes said. "One meant for her, not for the police. There's more to this than arson, Watson. There's message in the smoke." He turned to Miss Venn. "You said the book's title was the Umber Codex. Might you recall its final entry?" She hesitated. "Only a phrase. That which cannot be unseen will one day be forgotten, but never forgiven." Holmes's smile was as faint as it was unsettling. "Excellent. Then we must ask ourselves who wishes to remember the unseeable, and who fears its rediscovery." With that cryptic remark, he turned toward the door, and I knew our descent into the fire's mystery had only just begun. Chapter 2. A stranger in the smoke. The gray morning deepened into the more definite shades of noon as we concluded our inspection of the fire-damaged study. Holmes remained for nearly half an hour in deep silence, examining the burnt debris with careful precision, sifting through the scorched remains of Professor Venn's once pristine bookcases, the charred fragments of old scientific treatises, and the blackened threads of the curtain that had been the most visible victim of the flames. His sharp gaze missed nothing, and I knew better than to interrupt him while he was in such a state. Miss Althea Venn stood near the doorway, her gloved hands clasped in front of her. Her face was pale with fatigue, but not with fear. There was something beneath her composure, a kind of simmering resolve that I suspected she had inherited from her father. She watched Holmes without speaking, though I could tell she was desperate for answers. At length, Holmes stood up, brushing ash from his knees. He moved to the edge of the room where the shelves had once stood in ordered precision, and now slumped like the ribs of a burned-out ship. "Miss Van," he said, "you mentioned that you rarely entered this room." "That is correct." It was always my father's domain. After his passing, I had it locked for some months. It felt wrong to disturb his work, but the lock has not been forced. No, I still have the only key. Holmes took a turn about the room, his brow furrowed. "Tell me more of your father's journal, the Umbra Codex. Was it kept in this study?" "Yes, it was always in the locked case in that corner." She pointed to the left of the fireplace, where a tall glass-fronted cabinet now stood askew and empty. He once told me it was the culmination of 10 years' research notes, theories, even private experiments, but he never allowed anyone to read it. When I asked, he would grow quite withdrawn. "Did he have enemies or rivals?" She hesitated. "None that I know of. My father had strong views and a biting tongue in academic circles, but after his retirement he withdrew almost entirely from society. He rarely even left the house. He spent his last years corresponding with a handful of foreign scholars, mostly in Prague, and once, I believe, in Cairo." Holmes turned sharply. "Cairo? Yes, I only know because of the stamps. I asked once, and he said something about visions and darkness, which made little sense to me." At that moment there came a sharp knock at the front door. We froze. Hartright moved cautiously to the hallway. From where I stood, I could just glimpse the figure on the doorstep through the half-curtained pane of glass. Tall, lean, and unmistakable, even in the haze wearing ash-colored gloves. Holmes's eyes locked with mine. Without a word, he slipped behind the door leading into an adjacent study, disappearing like a wraith. Hartright opened the front door a crack. "Yes?" The visitor's voice was low, cultured, and laced with menace. "My employer wishes to inquire whether you still possess Professor Ven's manuscripts. He believes they may have been misunderstood in the wrong hands." "I have nothing," Hartright said, voice quivering. "Very well," said the man. "But understand, Professor should something unfortunate occur, your silence will not be mistaken for ignorance." He turned and vanished into the fog-dot. Holmes emerged from the side room, his face alight with purpose. "A professional," he said, "well-spoken, observant, and trained to intimidate without violence. This is no common burglar's pursuit. Miss Van is in danger. What shall we do?" Hartright asked. Holmes moved quickly. "We must return to her at once. Watson, we must place a watch on her residence and intercept any further visitors. The next one may not be so polite." "And the journal?" I asked. "Now that we understand its nature," Holmes said, "we must assume others will stop at nothing to obtain it. It's no longer merely a relic of Ven's eccentricity. It's a map of thoughts and perhaps, God help us, doors. Doors to what? To whatever lay smoldering in that empty room." Chapter 4. A vigil in the fog, the lamplight on Baker Street reflected in ripples of mist drifting past the windows. Holmes and I sat opposite each other at the writing desk. He had spread blueprints of St. Augustine's Row across its surface, marking windows, entrances, and escape routes, while I annotated details from Professor Hartwright's testimony. The clock's ticking was steady, punctuating our planning. With escalating tension, we must assume, Holmes said quietly, that there will be another attempt on the Codex. The visitor at Hartwright's home was deliberate. He knows what he seeks and where it lies. I looked up. Hartwright assured us the Codex had never passed from his possession since Professor Venn's death. Holmes tapped the blueprint. Yet he admitted the journal's existence wasn't widely known, or so he thought. Miss Venn's presence at the scene has put her on someone's radar. We were joined shortly by Dr. Althea Venn, whose countenance had grown more guarded since our last meeting. She sat with hands pressed tightly in her lap. "I shall lock the study and not enter it again," she said. "The maid Mary remains with me. I have told her to ignore anyone who arrives, even if it is Scotland Yard or the coroner. We cannot trust appearances." Holmes smiled faintly. "Wise, yet such precautions make us appear suspect. Our job is precaution, but with openness. Watson, I suggest you remain at the front parlor this evening. I shall stay in the study. Miss Venn and Mary will retire to the bedroom." He pinned lanterns to the walls, placed cold buckets nearby, and ensured every window click locked firmly. Once finished, he looked back at me. "We have one night. Come sunrise tomorrow, I intend to have a better understanding of our adversaries." The evening breeze whispered through Baker Street. I left Holmes to his vigil and strolled downstairs to Mrs. Hudson's parlor. There I found Miss Venn and Mary seated demurely, nursing cups of weak tea, Mary's prim face soft when she saw me. "Dr. Watson, I hope to be of assistance tonight. Miss Althea wished me to stay close." Althea watched me as though weighing a secret. I offered reassurance with a gentle smile. "I'll stay near, too," I said. "Between the three of us, there's hardly a corner Miss Venn might escape unnoticed." She managed a small grin. "I appreciate that, Dr. Watson. I only hope the danger won't come calling." I left them with the promise of checking often and ascended back to the study, where Holmes greeted me with a nod. He motioned to the door. "Send Mary to bed between 9 and 10. I shall remain here. We'll trade places at 1. Keep the lantern dim and the door ajar. Sound travels more easily through open space." I settled into a cushioned chair. Holmes stoked coals in the small grate and browsed the extinguished embers of last night's fire. My gaze wandered to where the Codex had once been hidden, a perfectly square indentation beneath the shelves. He had secluded the burned remnants under glass, hoping to attract rather than repel attention. The hours passed slowly. Darkness pooled beyond the curtains. The mist thickened and pressed against the window, as though wishing to enter. I pressed myself against the door, strained to catch the faintest sound of footsteps on the stair, sniffed for smoke, and reached for the handle, heart pounding uncertainly. Had I dozed? A murmur disturbed the hush shifting from the corridor below, followed by the soft click of the front door. "Back in a moment," I whispered to Holmes, rising. I opened the parlor door to find the maid returning from the street, hat askew. "Mary? What is it?" Her pale face was pressed close to mine. "Miss Venn, someone's come." Before I could ask who, the corridor light clicked on and the doorbell rang. That very moment, Holmes appeared behind me, his expression calm but serious. "Recall our instructions, Mary," he said gently, "and remain inside with Miss Van. Watson, allow me." He stepped forward to open the door. On the cold threshold stood a man tall, angular, dressed in a charcoal overcoat. His face was shadowed, only ash-gray gloves catching the lamplight. Holmes's eyes flicked to the gloves, then to his coat. The visitor spoke with quiet, polished menace. "I seek Miss Venn," he said, "the late Professor Venn's daughter." Holmes closed in, voice measured. "I am Sherlock Holmes. She's resting upstairs. May I inquire your business?" The stranger paused. "I am Mr. Crawford, assistant to Professor Hartright. My employer finds it troubling that Miss Van remains in ignorance of the danger around her. I have come to ensure she receives guidance." Holmes's expression grew steely. "Professor Hartright already knows our involvement and stands by Miss Van. We do not require assistance from strangers in charcoal, especially ones arriving after dark." Mr. Crawford raised an eyebrow. "Forgive me, but my letters went unanswered. The fire, the theft, we all find this alarming. I offer help." Holmes let the man stand in silence, then closed the door gently. He turned the lock twice. Holmes peered through the keyhole. The man lingered outside as though waiting for his return. Holmes took the gloves from the coat pocket on his chair. I watched in silence as he appraised them, dusty, ash-gray, the fingertips worn smooth. "Crawford," Holmes murmured. "He's here." His next moves were swift and decisive. He stepped behind the curtain near the stairs, lighting a lantern and leaving the corridor side door slightly unlatched. I stood by as he instructed Mary down the hall to distract the visitor with tea. Moments later, Mr. Crawford knocked again. Holmes opened the door more widely. "Mr. Crawford, I regret the misunderstanding. I shall escort you to Miss Venn's door myself." He offered Crawford his arm. I caught his eyes calculated, calm. His plan was forming dot. We guided Crawford into the study. Holmes motioned for tea as we walked. Crawford accepted and let slips of conversation escape, revealing his knowledge of Hartright's experimental work. He spoke of lumen obscura and hinted at social connections in Prague, mentioning Delange by name. I observed Holmes silent, carefully unfazed, absorbing every hint. Crawford asked loud enough for Mary to overhear. "Surely Miss Venn suspects more than just a burglar." Holmes responded coolly, "We suspect an orchestrated theft, but speculation belongs afterward." Mary delivered tea. Crawford lifted the cup with ash-gloved hands. Holmes watched closely. "Would you care to set your gloves aside, sir?" Crawford shook his head. "No. I fear the evening chill would chill the hands, and gesture disarmament may mislead." Holmes nodded. He returned the cup to the tray with precise control. In that moment, Mary slipped behind Crawford and twisted the glove from his hand, a gentle, cunning move. The other glove followed swiftly. As Holmes spoke more of the codex, Crawford's face paled. Holmes then held both gloves aloft, comparing them to the ones we had observed outside Hartright's, dusty with gray ash, freshly touched with traces of soil and faint curry aroma. Crawford exhaled sharply. "How did you—" Holmes stepped closer. "Your employer needed to ensure Miss Venn remained watchful. But asking without invitation is reckless. Only a man desperate or in fear would intrude so." Crawford swallowed. I was following instructions." Holmes paused. "But whose?" Crawford shrank. His study clock ticked with oppressive patience. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "Delange sent me." "Pierre Delange?" Crawford swallowed. "He believes the journal was hidden inside this house by Ven's will. He fears it contains the key to something that should be in his custody." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Delange believes it his by right," Crawford nodded. "He is relentless." Holmes looked at Mary. "Take him into the parlor, Watson. Offer him comfort. I will examine what he came to see." I led Crawford into the parlor. His description of Delange was chilling an opportunist, a broker of arcane knowledge through auction, rumor, and threat. Meanwhile, Holmes quizzed Miss Venn regarding the Codex's hiding place. She shook her head. "Only I know, and Hartright." Holmes locked eyes with her. "We must move it tonight. If Delange thinks it sits here, he will come again. No attempts at guidance can succeed until it is hidden more deeply." Miss Venn's nod was firm but frightened. Holmes returned to the room. He lifted a carpet corner and found a trapdoor, a remnant of a coal bin shaft sealed years ago. As part of property modifications, he tapped the wood. "This is unexplored space. Perhaps the book can be concealed here, hidden beneath floorboards our foe will never check." He moved with purpose, directing Mary to help slide back a panel. Beneath lay a dust-filled cavity, roughly the size of a shoebox. "Perfect," Holmes said. "Miss Venn, you will lower the Codex here. I will seal it until dawn, then we undertake deeper concealment." "But," she started. Holmes held up a firm hand. "Crawford will remain here through the night. Let him think we fled. Come morning, we plant misinformation. The journal was never here, but we will have moved it." I watched as he directed them as though orchestrating a delicate invasion. I have no desire for letters from Delange, asking for a prize and finding none. All moved in quiet efficiency. The Codex was wrapped in oilskin and placed in the cavity. Holmes slid the trapdoor and locked it with a padlock he had brought. The dust scattered across it, natural and undisturbed. We returned downstairs. Mary served the final cups of tea to Crawford, who accepted them with shaking hands. Holmes declared the house secure and invited Crawford to stay for the night under the impression his presence was accepted. As midnight approached, Holmes quietly shut off lanterns and retired to a small back room from where he could monitor footsteps in the hall. I slept in the front parlor, dozing in my chair until I was roused by Holmes's soft whisper. "Watson footsteps, he moves." I roused Crawford, whispering. Holmes motioned us both from behind the study door as Crawford realized, too late, that the trapdoor was locked. He began to rise, but Holmes blocked the corridor with deliberate weight. Crawford stammered. Holmes gently but firmly said, "Your employer seeks answers. We know Delange's name, but if you remain here, the authorities may wish to make a more formal inquiry." "Are you prepared for that?" Crawford's shoulders slumped. "No." Holmes gestured. "Then we escort you to Hartright in the morning. You must help us identify the next link in this chain." Crawford nodded faintly. By 4 a.m., the three of us, Holmes, Crawford, and I, stood on the front stoop with Mary's discreet farewell. Miss Venn remained safe within. Holmes handed Crawford a sealed letter addressed to Professor Hartright. "Deliver that yourself and explain everything. Consider it your chance to do right." Crawford's lip quivered. "Thank you. You've shown me." He paused. Mercy. Holmes nodded once. Consider it a mercy we will extend only so long as you remain truthful. As Crawford disappeared into the gray dawn, Holmes turned back to me. That, Watson, is how one intercepts a hunter before he truly strikes. We have saved the codex, but more important, we have delayed the lumen obscura. He paused, eyes reflecting the weak light. And tomorrow we press forward. Chapter 5. Cloak of smoke and shadow, the dawn's pale light crept over London, unmasking fog-choked streets and dew-slicked pavements. Under its watchful sheen, Miss Venn's home seemed strangely tranquil, an ordinary Georgian townhouse, belying the secrets hidden within. Holmes, and I emerged from morning mist to find her on the stoop, looking more composed than I would have expected. Mary hovered nearby, not yet fully awake, but alert in her resolve. "Good morning," Holmes greeted with his usual curt nod. "Good morning," she replied, voice resolute. Mr. Crawford arrived early, as promised. "He has gone to Hartright's, I imagine," Holmes said. "Once we receive his account, we may proceed openly," Althea nodded. "Things feel heavier now that night has passed." "Understandably," Holmes observed. "Yet today that weight will begin to lift, provided we continue carefully." Inside the study, Holmes cautiously unearthed the journal's concealment, a trapdoor hidden by the distressed carpet, and then resealed. He lifted the lid with precision, resting the oilskin-wrapped Umbra Codex upon the desk in careful reverence. "Althea," he said, "I shall transport this to 221B Baker Street for safekeeping, along with a written verification of its authenticity and condition. Shall we proceed now?" She watched him closely. "Will it be safe?" "In my hands, yes. But trust is earned, Miss Venn. My proof will rest in that." Mary appeared with tea. Holmes accepted the cup. "You merit warmth on such mornings." "You said..." Miss Venn managed a small smile as Holmes took final notes from the Codex's arrival and condition. The tube carriage rattled overhead as we passed beneath. London toward Baker Street. Literature for the cigarette-chimneyed carriage. Holmes remained silent, seemingly absorbed by the Codex's weight in his briefcase. Once home, he ushered the journal to his private chambers, securing it beneath lock and glass. With meticulous care, he placed the wrapper in acid-free tissue, laid the accompanying padlock and seal, and documented serial references in his notebook. Mary and Althea watched, silent guardians of both curiosity and fear. Late morning passed without notable incident. Holmes and I dissected Crawford's report and considered the implications, Delange's network, the reach of lumen obscura, and probable locations for further journal copies. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson answered briefly. Holmes stepped out, expression guarded. I followed to the landing. "Mr. Holmes," a voice called in clipped tones. "Dr. Watson." The visitor wore a charcoal overcoat, no gloves, yet his eyes were sharp, practiced. "Inspector Lestrade," Holmes greeted. "Pray come in." Lestrade followed into the sitting room, glancing first at Holmes, then at me, and finally affixing gaze on the quaint knick-knacks lining the mantel. He snapped the door closed with sudden precision. "Something peculiar," he began. "I thought it might concern your current predicament." He cleared his throat, leaning in close. "A burglary last night at the house next to Miss Venn's. No theft, but disturbances, broken glass, footprints, sawtooth marks near the doorframe." Holmes's gaze sharpened. Same thief? Lestrade nodded, defeated. That's what they think, but no sign of forced entry. They called it the work of a professional, someone who wants to intimidate, not steal. Holmes studied Lestrade. And what do Scotland Yard make of it? Lestrade tapped a communique stored in his breast pocket. They're calling it linked to the same case, though they don't know which. You again? Holmes's lips curved faintly. Always. Late afternoon found the three of us walking in St. Augustine's Row, the December chill sharp in our breaths. Holmes followed footprints in the crushed leaves near the damaged frame door of Crawford's, and someone had scrawled in fine chalk on the door, "The flame seeks its philosopher, a cryptic threat." Lestrade paled. Holmes examined it. Philosopher. Somebody sees Professor Venn as the origin of that flame. A metaphor for eureka or witchlight. Either way, a statement. Lestrade glanced over his shoulder. We're getting too close. Holmes's burst. Gaze hardened. Then we must go farther, more careful. He paused, then gently pointed to another mark, this one half erased. Ash guard the gate. He swept at it, removing chalk with a swift flourish. We are walking into a storm, Lestrade. But knowledge without caution is folly. We shall increase the guard Holmes and Watson at St. Augustine's at night. Inspector by day. And I wish you to place temporary officers in every house along the row. Lestrade hesitated, but nodded. We shall comply. The evening fire at Baker Street burned low as Holmes brewed tea. I noted him uncharacteristically quiet, mind apparently. On edge. You have Lassider's report? I asked. Dotty poured. Here. It detailed the disrupted burglary and threatened chalk. They'd found no glove marks, but some traces of ash and a faint petrichor scent, an allusion to ancient dust. Or mortar. Holmes tested the aroma, then closed his eyes. Ash and earth, soil from subterranean crypts. This stalker is making a mark. I cleared my throat. Subterranean? Are we speaking of secret chambers again? Holmes nodded. As I said when we visited Hartright doors and the mind await, physical counterparts in the earth. The thief has grown bolder. They think it's safe to sow clues in chalk and threat, yet each clue narrows our field. He tapped his index finger on the map of Bloomsbury. We must present ourselves now, Watson all. Of us? Miss Venn informed, Lestrade cooperating, and I will send word to Sir Adrian Fenton. He has expertise in crypts and subterranean design. If we can anticipate their next move, we stay one step ahead. As Holmes placed the map away, another knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a tall, gray-suited gentleman with gentlemanly poise, Sir Adrian Fenton, in his early 50s. Steel-gray mustache and bright, inquisitive eyes. Holmes rose, smiling. Sir Adrian, thank you for coming. On such short notice, Fenton inclined his head. Never mind. When one hears of occult thefts and midnight chalk threats, one comes. He surveyed the room, tea in hand, then sat and shared details, blueprints of ancient crypts beneath London churches, patterns that matched Professor Venn's Morocco notes, and possible alignment with the path beneath St. Augustine's Row. Yule? Note, he said, spreading paper. A foundation laid in the 18th century, an access point to a sealed vault. Card catalogs show Dr. Venn requesting permission to study, but deny his research reveals any exploration. Holmes traced the lines. That aligns with Hartright's memory of a sealed coal shaft repurposed. Could the thief be looking for a locus of power, something hidden? Fenton's eyes glinted. Precisely. Holmes rose, animation flooding. This thin features. Tell me, sir, would one hide a book in a crypt where no natural light penetrates? Fenton paused. It seems a straightforward way to preserve or bury something, though not easily recovered. Holmes closed the paper. Then we must consider they may not seek only to steal. They may be searching to discover and perhaps to resurrect. The group dispersed with quiet resolve. Lestrade to police plans, Fenton to church archives, Miss Venn and Mary to safe houses. Holmes and I returned alone to Baker Street. Another visitor arrives at midnight. This time I suspect more than chalk, Holmes murmured. Bring your report sheets. Tomorrow we confront the crypt beneath St. Augustine's. With that, he withdrew to his room. I lit a fire, pulled a chair close, and covered the board with notes and cross-references to Venn's studies. Hartright's account of the incidents in Prague, Fenton's crypt maps, Lassiter's chalk, and Lestrade's house reports dot my life has often been one of watching Holmes' mind work. Tonight, however, I felt subject to the same tremor and uncanny sense that the stakes had risen from stolen flame to ritual ashes, that beneath the familiar houses of Bloomsbury something long hidden stirred anew, and we were nearing the threshold of both fire and forgotten passage. Chapter 6. Beneath the surface a soft drizzle settled over Bloomsbury as daylight began. Its retreat, painting the streets with a sheen of dampness that glowed beneath gas lamps. Somewhere beyond the mist, church bells tolled an echo of warnings past, and a signal of evening's deepening watch. Holmes convened a huddled meeting at Baker Street. Present were Dr. John Watson, Inspector Lestrade, Sir Adrian Fenton, Miss Althea, Venn, Mary, and Professor Hartright, who had arrived with Crawford's letter, fretting his own conscience. Their faces, illuminated by a single lamp, reflected shared determination and simmering tension. Holmes began. Tonight, we enter the ground beneath St. Augustine's Row. We do so with purpose to uncover what lies buried. Yet we proceed cautiously. Our adversaries believe themselves protectors of hidden knowledge. We shall prove them wrong by bringing truth to light. He passed around maps and diagrams, Fenton, leaning over a plan of the basement beneath No. 12, pointed to a narrow corridor indicated by old surveying notes. Here, a small ventilation shaft leads to what we suspect is a false crypta hiding place crafted for whatever Professor Venn concealed. Lestrade cleared his throat. Police will stand ready above ground. Any sign of trouble, we swarm in. Hartright's voice trembled as he asked, Will Miss Venn and her maid be safe? Holmes met his gaze. They will remain at Baker Street. If anything goes awry, we will have them out before the night is out. As twilight deepened outside, the group prepared. Holmes checked a silver lantern he carried, its flame steady and purposefully small to avoid attracting undue notice. Fenton carried stout gloves for digging. Lestrade had a service revolver, though he admitted he'd rather not fire it if he could help it. Hartright brought a small camera to document any findings. Crawford, still clearing guilt in his eyes, was offered second-hand gloves and a promise of safety. Miss Venn looked on, resolute. Mary gripped her shawl. Watson placed a protective hand on Althea's shoulder. Holmes spoke quietly. Tonight's darkness may expose more than we intend, but not seeking the truth would leave us in ignorance. and we will not permit that. A silent procession made its way back to St. Augustine's Row. Holmes opened a service door at the back, revealing a brick-walled staircase descending into earth. Dampness clung to the air. The walls dripped with years of subterranean neglect. Beneath, the ground steps led to a dirt-floored chamber. Candles revealed dusty vaults, cobwebs, and a strange stillness as if the stones themselves remembered. Fenton followed the map to a sealed portcullis forged into stone. He brushed away dust, his fingers tracing runic scratches left by unknown hands. Holmes knelt and whispered, "This matches Ven's own sketches." He took note of these symbols. They likely formed contours to mislead. Lestrade cleared his throat. "Softly, please. We don't know if others may be close." With Fenton's aid, Holmes levered open a small pivot of stone. The portcullis groaned and revealed a narrow passage beyond, thick with grave tension. Inside lay a small chamber, roughly the size of a coffin room, lined with flagstones and littered with shallow footprints new. They circled a low basin at the room's center. The basin contained nothing but a few rusted chains and dried stains. Cartwright stepped forward, camera trembling in his hands. This is where Ven may have hidden the book. Holmes examined the basin's edge. Or tried to contain something else entirely. Lestrade whispered, "What are we dealing with?" Holmes dipped a glove into the basin and withdrew a speck of ash-stained dust. Evidence that someone returned after the codex was moved. The question now, when? As the group exited the chamber, Mary gasped behind them. At the staircase's top, on the stone wall, someone had scratched a single word. Rinenbe writ glimmered faintly wide in chalk. Miss Ven shivered. Holmes knelt to inspect. This is not meant to threaten, though it may. It is meant to remind. The book is not safe unless we understand what lies inside. His voice softened. We must proceed, and soon. Back at Baker Street, the rain had intensified. Cartwright, shaken, confessed to carrying a copy of a final letter written by Ven, ostensibly a private testament to the dangers of his research. He believed it might provide guidance. Holmes nodded, absorbing each line. My work teases the walls between reality and deep mind. If it is unearthed without caution, it may unleash fissures not easily closed. Holmes placed the letter in a brass envelope, sealing it with tape. We will keep this secure until we know we need to use it. Each step we take will be deliberate. Lestrade tapped the envelope. No reckless exposure, not tonight. The group dispersed into separate rooms to wait out the rest of the night. Holmes chose the front parlor where he could watch both door and staircase. I took the study, candle lit, ready to note any sounds. Time passed like stretching rope got at midnight's chime. A soft footfall drifted above, then a pause, and the soft click of someone trying the front door. Holmes stood and opened, revealing Crawford, dripping from the rain, eyes wide with urgency. He swallowed, but spoke clearly. Something happened below. Holmes followed with him. I trailed Dot. We re-entered the hidden chamber. The basin was overturned. The portal slid half open. Streaks of fresh footprints indicated a rushed exit. The basin held nothing. The chains once laid across it now lay twisted. The chamber was desecrated. Holmes crouched, running fingers over a mud-streaked footprint. They were not here for the codex. They were here for what it contained, and now they're a step ahead. He turned to us all. We face not just a secret society, but men unafraid of breaking oaths and tearing open doors that should remain closed. Miss Venn bit her lip. Will they come for me? Holmes drew her close. Only if they believe you know the key. We'll ensure that knowledge stays with us. By the time we returned to Baker Street, the sky had turned pale, and rain fell with quiet persistence. Holmes arranged for Crawford to depart under protection and entrusted Lestrade to maintain a physical watch. As dawn broke, he finally allowed a weary smile. We left them with nothing tonight, no codex, no proof. But one thing was exposed, their recklessness. That will be their undoing. I nodded, but unease clung cold. Holmes ended. To solve this, next we need to confront Peer. Delange and his finger may lie at the heart of this storm. The firelight flickered as we prepared to greet the day and the deeper darkness that still awaited. U.S. Chapter 7. The enemy of parallels rain-slicked cobblestones glistened beneath the trembling gaslight as Holmes and I approached the narrow facade of Delange's Antiquities, nestled incongruously among law chambers and notaries on Chancery Lane. The shop front displayed a curious blend of leather-bound tomes and grim, relics, Egyptian talismans, Latin incantation scrolls, and glass jars of dark-tinged powders, as though law and occultism were married under its paneled windows. Holmes paused before the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the hush that draped the street. He turned to me, his eyes a pale fire in the gloom. If Delange is involved, he murmured, he will greet us with calm interest, not alarm his kind of arrogance. We must feign equal composure. I nodded, more to steady myself than to disagree. Inside, the shop was redolent of musk, and candle smoke a dense perfume of hidden worlds. The dim lights and ornate cabinets cast silhouettes that flitted like ghosts. A lone figure a scholar's height, slender, immaculate, with slicked-back hair and cold, pale eyes, stood behind an oak counter. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said smoothly, his voice measured. "I did not expect, though, this time of night I ought not to be surprised." Holmes inclining his head. "Mr. Delange, I've come to claim the Umber Codex, the book of Professor Gerald Venn." Delange's gaze flicked, not with surprise, but with an exercise in calculation. "The Codex, yes. Many seek its pages, and yet ... He waved one white-gloved hand toward a single-shelved volume. "It is here." Holmes's footsteps were a whisper as he moved forward. "Show me." Behind him, I noted the shopkeeper's smile tighten scarcely perceptibly. Delange reached beneath the counter, retrieving 2 volumes, one battered and ordinary, the other sealed with dark crimson wax, stamped with the crowned serpent, the very emblem Miss Venn had described. The glint in his eyes told of pride. This was the object of our pursuit. "Which is the Codex?" Holmes asked. Delange's voice was soft. "The one on the right." Holmes lifted it gently, as though cradling a newborn. He tapped the seal thoughtfully. "Delange," he said, eyes steady, "I am aware of the society you support, Lumen Obscura. They believe the Codex contains access to ... doors in the mine." His voice was cool, precise. "I came to recover it, not to condemn you to see for myself." Delange sighed and removed his gloves with unhurried grace. "Ah, my dear Mr. Holmes, so noble." He slid the Codex along to Holmes. who clutched it to his chest, thumb resting on the wax seal, needing its assurance. Holmes did not release the book. Instead, he fixed Delange with a steady gaze. "Your gloves, why do you always wear them?" Delange's smile disclosed partial truths. As a gentleman safeguards his hands, so must he guard his reputation. Holmes's voice was a low rumble. "Or conceal it." "You are rude," Delange said coolly, "but I expected as much." Holmes met him eye to eye. "Consider this metaphor. A man who hides his fingerprints is taking care not to leave his signature on his crimes. The codex in your custody has left blood on your ledger." Delange inhaled sharply. "You have no proof." Holmes tilted his head. "Perhaps not yet, but I intend to recover the codex and to understand its contents. To that end I will accompany it, at least for the moment." Delange's voice softened. "You don't realize what you carry, Mr. Holmes. The pages contain more than doctrine. They hold power. They are dangerous. Even you cannot control it." Holmes's lip curled. "Then you prove my point. No society or man has the right to hoard dangerous ideas. They ought to be studied, understood, then judged. And I will judge them. Tonight we proceed." Delange stepped back, keeping one hand on the counter. "Very well. But know this, once the codex is out of my hands, you are being followed. The final phase begins." Holmes brushed past him, codex secure in his satchel. "Then let them follow." We exited into the London drizzle. The damp air clung to our coats. Holmes signaled to a waiting hansom dot as we rattled southward toward Dover Street. Holmes's expression was pensive. "Watson," he began. Delange believed himself untouchable. His sneering confidence tells me he believes Lumen Obscura is near men he trusts. He shook his head. "But the codex now lies away from their reach." I nodded, yet he seemed reluctant, almost fearful. "Fear is opinion's dry bone," Holmes said sharply. "The real question is, how much do we understand before the storm breaks?" Our destination was not the crypt beneath St. Augustine's, as I had expected, but a discreet address in Dover Street. Holmes hailed the cab, in what seemed like preparation for confrontation. The house there bore no markers among its neighbors, but the narrow street was unnaturally still. Holmes knocked twice. The door opened an inch, then closed. Moments later it opened fully again, revealing Hartright, who nodded curtly at the codex and stepped aside. Inside, the room was scattered with furniture covered in cloth, an abandoned or secret workshop. Oil lamps and compass drawings lay on a central table. Paper lanterns hung from a collapsed chandelier. "Strange to see you here," Hartright said. "I half expected you to approach Tobias Crawford." "Ah?" Holmes touched a dusty diagram. We walked a circle. "Delange led us here. This old house stands on an old chapel crypt, roughly parallel to the one beneath St. Augustine's." Hartright stepped closer. "It was a workshop. Once Professor Venn conducted experiments here. Hartright had removed glass equipment when he learned Venn had used them for something more nefarious. Hartright showed us a set of glass funnels and vapor chambers. We tested hallucinogens, rare compounds from Prague used for breaking egoic boundaries. Venn wanted to record parallel existence and visions. I shivered. He attempted psychosis. Holmes focused. Did he succeed? Hartright shook his head. No one knows. He told me only that he glimpsed something, the mirror of darkness. He sealed this place afterward. Holmes tapped. The codex satchel. They sought to liberate what Venn imprisoned. But the crypt beneath St. Augustine's holds marks they could not replicate here. They found their Chad a chamber of proof. He paced to where Hartright stored a battered compass. The glass had cracked. Empty lanterns, symbols on walls, experiments done in secrecy. Holmes returned the codex to the satchel. This chamber is a map, and the crypt beneath St. Augustine's is its heart. He lifted a dusty sheet. It was a plan aligning the crypt's axis to the eclipse or some lunar event. An alignment builds energy, even if symbolic. Lumen Obscura believes alignment opens the mind's gates. He looked at Hartright. When is the next lunar apex? Hartright checked his notes and paused. 3 nights hence. Then we have a deadline, Holmes said Dot as we stepped out. A gust tore past us. The lantern light danced. In the face of night's shadows, Holmes halted. Look, he whispered Dot in the alley. A silhouette turned and moved, cloaked, gloved. Delane's watching us, but at a distance. He's come, Holmes said quietly. He walks among the shadows. Let him follow. The mirror awaits us. We allowed Delane's figure to trail watching as he paused once, then vanished into the fog. Holmes's jaw tightened. Now we see where he stands, he said. Now the reflection shifts. We return to Baker Street. All the while the London night sighed and moaned. Holmes placed the codex beneath triple locks. He granted no words beyond. We have the book. We understand the threat. And we have 3 nights. Let each one find us wary, unbroken, and ready. The night closed around us like a cloak. But now we were armed not only with blade and glass, but knowledge and time. Chapter 8. Echoes from the abyss the moon had set, and the pre-dawn chill pressed against Baker Street with inhuman patience. Gone were the city's daytime hums. Only distant church bells and the hiss of morning fog hinted that day was yet to come. Holmes stood at the window, hands clasped behind him, eyes fixed on the pale horizon. You'll want rest, Doctor, he said quietly, without turning. I shook off the remnants of slumber. I'll sleep shortly, but your mind is moving too fast for my own, he smiled faintly. Perhaps, but 3 nights remain before the ritual moon's zenith. I looked at the satchel where the Umbra Codex lay. Its weight seemed heavier tonight. The morning brought a brittle kind of stillness. Holmes convened the group once more in the sitting room. Present were Althea Van, Inspector Lestrade, Professor Hartright, Sir Adrian Fenton, and the remorseful Crawford, each reflecting fatigue, determination, and underlying dread. Holmes cleared his throat. We know Delange is following us. The Codex is in secure custody. Tonight marks our preparation. Tomorrow we break the seal. But first, he continued, I find his workshop beneath Dover Street to be a parallel model, but incomplete. The crypt beneath St. Augustine's remains our locus. Fenton has secured plans. Lestrade has approved a warrant for forced access. Hartright will attend in place of Miss Venn. And Crawford, he looked stern, you will remain at Baker Street, guarded. Crawford bowed his head. Yes, sir. Holmes addressed Althea. You and Mary remain here tonight. Do not leave this house, even if I am absent. She clasped her hands. I understand. Lestrade nodded and pushed his hat back on his brow. We'll reinforce the area. No surprise unless they intend it. Holmes inhaled deeply. That is what worries me most. The hours until dusk crept forward like exhausted prisoners. Holmes reviewed every possible sketch and note. I read aloud Crawford's written apology and Hartright's letter of fear. Fenton cross-referenced London church foundations for subterranean access. Lestrade received updates at the door. Holmes remained absorbed, occasionally pausing to rub his eyes, but never losing momentum dot by dot. The team assembled in St. Augustine's Row. Holmes led us through the back service alley into the boarded. Entrance at No. 12. Armed only with lanterns, gloves, and archaeological caution, we descended the damp stairs again into Earth's embrace. A candle flickered in the basin room. The chamber's floor was scuffed with footprints. Chalk dust lay, thick around the edges. Holmes gestured for silence. Lestrade whispered, "They were here again." "Yes," Holmes replied softly. "And we passed unobserved. Now we take the codex with us. Hartright, keep watch at the base. Fenton, take the north wall." Lights swung down the corridor. We convened at the sealed stone portcullis. Holmes and Fenton pried at the grooves, countering centuries of neglect. The stones shivered, dust fell. The portal opened slowly onto the coffin chamber. Inside, narrow air and pale candle halo summoned us. A low platform stood at the rear, beneath which lay the basin intruding into the platform's stone. Holmes stepped forward. "This is where it happens." He knelt by the basin. Spectral footprints cratered near it. In the basin lay charcoal and ash evidence of fire. At one end, a slender mirror, an old, cheap thing of silver backing leaned. Hartright swallowed. The mirror of darkness. He left it. Holmes lifted it. A vessel of illusion. He crouched and pressed the codex's silhouette in half-light. If they seek to bind the codex to this mirror, to charge it, then we interrupt. We arranged a guard around the chamber as Holmes began chalking a circle on the stones copying the crypt marks. Barnacled lines snaked outward, anchored in grooves that housed a fine powder-likely pulverized ash. BROADCAST, here as ritual dust. Fenton offered candles. Holmes shook his head. No, cold light. Only Hartright's hands trembled. Could it harm Miss Venn? It could harm anyone, Holmes said softly. We contain it tonight. The codex remains unbound. Lightning flashed underground, the trembling in stone, and footsteps echoed above. Lestrade's revolver appeared. It begins, he whispered. Holmes held up a hand. Remember what we know. He clapped twice. Now, we sealed the basin with a lead-lined box brought from Baker Street. Hartright placed the codex inside. Holmes dropped the mirror on top and hammered the lid in place. A sudden crash echoed down the corridor. Figures appeared, ash-gloved. 3 men delange among them, stepping into the chamber with dripping coats and faces grim. Holmes flicked out the lanterns. Blackness enveloped us. We heard boots click. A voice hissed, "Stop! He carries it." Holmes responded, "If you move, we are forced to shoot." A scream metal against stone. Launched knives clanged. Lestrade fired once. A cry answered. Holmes rose. "Stand where you are." Another flash of lightning from Holmes's pocket release lamp. A man, startled, stumbled, caught in a golden pool. Holmes seized the lead box. Here, the codex and the mirror. You wanted memory, reflection, bottom of a lead coffin. We enlist you as its witnesses or perish alongside it. Delange laughed, harsh in the echoing darkness. Holmes clicked his satchel open. The mirror glimmered. I ask you, what do you see? Delange hesitated. Holmes's white face held triumph. Delange stepped forward. I see nothing. Holmes nodded. It's broken. The mirror remains intact only until looked upon. Reflection destroyed by fear. You never understood the mirror's cost. Delange's posture sagged. Holmes then turned to Lestrade. Take them. For trespass, assault, and ritual violation. Do it quickly. By dawn, the ritual site lay emptied. The chamber found dust-free, but rid of the mirror, which Holmes declared cracked and useless. The codex remained sealed in the lead box and returned to Baker Street. Inspector Lestrade, brisk and weary, apprehended Delange and his men in the crypt, thick with moist dawn fog above. We emerged into sunless street, dimly hopeful. Back at Baker Street, Holmes studied the codex. The seal held. He sat at the window, morning mist swirling. At 3 days' end, he mused, they sought to bind the codex to fear itself. In the mirror's seal lies the final lesson, that some knowledge is itself a crucible. But each spark we extinguished now dims their power. I poured him tea. He accepted it in both hands. We have delayed them, but the codex exists. That is the ember we must guard. I nodded, double quotes, and soon, he whispered, we must discover how it sets the world aflame. Chapter 9. The mirror's shattered reflection London's morning. Rolled back the stones of Bloomsbury in a soft gray wash. The earth beneath St. Augustine's Row lay cold and secretive, yet tonight's subterranean confrontation had altered its mood. Holmes moved through Baker Street as if stooped by thought, each step measured like a man woken from profound dreams. I sensed he was processing the ritual battle, the failed mirror, and what remained enclosed within the Umbra COD. Holmes began the day by reviewing every person who had entered the crypt. Delange and his men, Lestrade's police, Hartright, Fenton. He catalogued footwear impressions, clothing remnants, soot traces, and even the low powdery dust that wouldn't settle. Each item was a thread that might lead us to the society's deeper intentions. He paused at a faint stain on his glove. Mud from neckline crypt tiles where Delange had slipped, and examined it with magnifier and curiosity. Tell me, Holmes. I ventured, what did you learn from them? He did not answer at once. Instead, he recited aloud. They sought control. They believed that by unifying the codex and the mirror during lunar apex, they could force the mind's unseen doors open. They were wrong, but the attempt suggests they had conviction. Miss Van and Mary joined us at Baker Street, along with Hartright and Fenton. Their faces were eerily hushed, some relief, others anxiety. Holmes arranged us around the table. He held up the sealed lead box. The codex remains locked. The mirror is irreparable, but the question persists. What lies within? Hartright swallowed. In Verne's notebooks, he mentioned a final section named simply Door Beyond Seeing. I never glimpsed it. He guarded that passage jealously. Holmes nodded to him. We'll consult the rest of Ven's manuscripts for clues. Fenton will. You research lunar alignments, eclipses, and symbols of mirror imagery in Western occult? Fenton tapped his notebook. Yes, of course. Miss Venn asked quietly. After tonight, will Delange not return? Probably, Holmes replied. But we now know much more than they. They are rattled, Mary exhaled. I hope this nightmare ends soon. Holmes's response was a rare comfort. It will. But we must take the next step carefully. This is war by intellect and reflection. I escorted Hartright and Fenton. Downstairs, as Holmes reminded them, keep away from the codex. Let me sort the content and context myself. In the study's light, Hartright retrieved copying blocks of Venn's already catalogued research. As Fenton reviewed them, Hartright read aloud in hushed tones. The mind's threshold passes through symbolism, through those we fear, and recognize in equal measure. Fear, Holmes said quietly, is the mind's deadbolt, yet Venn aimed to unlock it. By combining memory the codex with mirror reflection and astrological alignment, he sought something new. He paused. Delange wanted power, not enlightenment. Late afternoon, Lestrade arrived with news, dossiers on occult societies, arrests of low-level collectors, but not Delange himself. Yet Dottie offered Holmes a small pack. Inside lay a ledger Delange's visitor list. Names included diplomats, academics, and a particularly alarming entry. Dr. Marcus Abernathy, a psychologist known for private clinics in Harley Street. An enamel surgeon, Lestrade added. He's off the map for weeks. Holmes clenched a hand around the ledger. He's the bridge between academic respectability and arcane ambition. Watch him. Lestrade's eyes flicked to Hartright. I have to admit, Holmes, this feels bigger than missing journals. Holmes poised over the ledger. Yes, this is moving from theft to recruitment of those with power, knowledge, or metaphorical keys. By increasing fog, evening swallowed Baker Street. Holmes and I reviewed warrants on Abernathy's practice and apartment. Holmes brewed tea, but his hand shook softly, an uncharacteristic tremor. Watson, he said at length, Delange will seek to protect his assets. The codex is in our hands, but its contents? That remains insider cash. Our next phase is disclosure. We must ask ourselves, who else knows already? Whose footsteps do we overlook? Before I could respond, Miss Venn arrived at the door face, pale under candlelight. I thought I heard someone whisper in the hall. Her voice trembled. I saw a figure-long coat, gloves, slipping away. Holmes set down his teacup. Again, they are watching us. Holmes instructed Mary to remain downstairs while he and I followed Miss Venn upstairs. We moved in silence, footsteps barely audible, hearts pacing louder in the hushed dot at her bedroom door. Holmes flicked the latch from inside. He ushered her in. The walls bore portraits of her father, serene and still. She trembled. Holmes stood at the edge of the hearth. They think knowledge is power, but silence is protection. They cannot steal what lies unused in cold minds. We returned to Holmes's study. He retrieved a single photographed black and white portrait of Abernathy, smiling politely at his office. I will confront him, Holmes said quietly, in his own domain, at midnight tomorrow. He set the photograph on his papers. You don't plan to arrest him, I said. No, Holmes replied. I plan to observe with him and listen. What he says in confidence may reveal more than any. Entry in Delange's now. Rest. I slept uneasily. Noon passed. Afternoon lingered. Dawn came. Midday Berlin clock, something unlabeled, yet urgent. Holmes paced, crafting a plan with inscrutable precision. At 12:30, Holmes and I stood before Abernathy's unremarkable door. Beneath our coats, concealed notebooks. At Holmes's signal, I rang. A small bell chimed. The door opened slightly. Abernathy's face met us uncertain, polite. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I assume," he said, voice soft but brittle. "Please come in." I was expecting someone. Holmes stepped across thresholds. Inside, the room was clinical bare, except for a desk, chairs, and an anatomical chart of the brain on the wall. Abernathy cleared his throat. "I have nothing to hide, but I expect discretion." I was approached by someone representing a group favoring deeper human insight. I declined. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "And the codex?" Abernathy inclined head. I was shown an excerpt just enough to tempt me. They offered research funds, positions, even ... partnerships. "And you refused," Holmes said. "For now." Holmes paused. The hydrogen lamp lit his features with sterile glare. "Then you are not loyal to Lumen Obscura, but you are compromised." Abernathy drew a breath. "They told me they meant no harm. They want to evolve consciousness." Holmes shook his head. "They see enlightenment as justification. Your professional standing brought legitimacy they lacked, and they intend to wield it." "I understand," Abernathy said gently, "but I have no proof." Holmes leaned forward. "Then you will assist us in acquiring it. I need your help to validate the contents of the codex. You will join Hartright and Fenton to extrapolate, but only once we know it's safe." Abernathy clasped his hands. "Yes, for Miss Venn's sake, yes." We left quietly. Holmes nodded. "To me, Watson," he said under his breath, "we've placed a man inside their circle of influence. But more importantly, he knows enough to help us understand the book or to expose them further." He paused, gazing into night. "And soon we will know whether the codex contains madness, revelation, or weaponizable insights. Chapter X unveiling." The codex, the golden tendrils of dawn, crept through the dusty curtains of 221B. Holmes stood, gazing out upon the fog-shrouded street, an image of composed determination. By his side on the desk lay the sealed lead box, still heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. I watched as he finally turned, expression grave. "Today we begin decoding," he announced. "With Dr. Abernathy's insight and your observations, Watson, we'll proceed step by step." Miss Venn, pale but resolved, arrived with Mary clutching a bundle of fresh paper. Holmes welcomed them gently, drawing Mary aside to instruct her on discreet note-taking. I offered a reassuring nod to Althea, though the sheen of worry in her eyes remained. Holmes then rose, taking the lead box in hand. "Dr. Abernathy and Sir Adrian await me at Hartright's chambers. Watson, will you join us?" I nodded, heart fluttering with anticipation and dread. We departed by hansom for Hartright's ebony-paneled library, arriving to find the professor and Fenton in discussion. Abernathy sat poised, notebook open, expression alert. Holmes greeted each in turn. "Thank you for joining on such short notice." He placed the box on the table and carefully extracted the codex and the cracked mirror atop it. Fenton leaned forward, curiosity shining. We choose to start here. Holmes explained, with the Codex's prologue, its opening dogma. In Professor Venn's handwriting it reads, asterisk, Mary is the architect. Reflection, its crucible. Fear, its sentinel. He paused, voice steady. We need to understand these metaphors. Professor Hartwright smiled thinly, very poetic. But the message is clear. Secure memory, the journal, tested by mirror reflection, then reign in the inevitable fear that follows. Abernathy tapped his fountain pen. This aligns with what Lumen Obscura attempted. They combined memory and reflection in their ritual. But the Codex, if it's theological, will bear instructions or at least guidance. Holmes observed him quietly. Then here's the method. We read aloud, one paragraph at a time. Reflect on meaning. Do not glance in the mirror. Each of. You take turns, they nodded. Holmes sat first and read paragraph, one heavy, archaic Latin, smudged in places. He translated. That which is not remembered is lost to the void, yet that which is recalled demands confrontation. He set the book aside. Abernathy's brow furrowed. Confrontation of memory. He advocates facing past experiences actively rather than repressing them. Fenton exhaled. And the mirror? We hold no instruction yet. Holmes reopened the Codex to a marginal note faint in V's in hand, referencing choral convergence at Moonbeam. I suspect, he said, this is more than metaphor. It points to communal reflection. The Codex was meant not merely for one mind, but for echoes, shared memory. Hartwright tapped, his pipe ash. Consider that Venn's last note and the prologue were warnings, not invitations. He'd buried these metaphors, thinking more that the ritual should never be completed. Abernathy gestured. If so, those who accessed it may believe otherwise, that it provides enlightenment. Holmes's gaze drifted to me. Watson, read the next passage. My hand shook slightly as I took up the Codex. I read, lay the mirror upon the altar of recollection and peer into its depths when memory bleeds greatest. Observe what the memory sees. Not you. Silence fell. Fenton swallowed. Bleeds. Greatest, strongest memory, emotional pain, or joy. Holmes nodded. They planned emotional invasion. Mirror is portal, memory is gateway. We proceeded paragraph by paragraph. Each brought nuance on sensory keys, lunar symbols, psychotropic substances, prog-derived, and communal meditations. Together they knit a dangerous tapestry. Halfway through, Holmes paused. His hand clutched his temple. He looked at us. With steel. We have enough. This is not benign philosophy. It is instruction and set toward emotional exploitation at critical psychological threshold. Hartwright shuddered. My God, he meant to weaponize memory. Holmes inhaled, and they attempted to begin the ritual tonight under lunar alignment. He closed the Codex. 4 nights remain before they reach their apex. We must stop them, and we must finish the ritual ourselves, under watch, to ensure they cannot. Reclaim control. Holmes laid out a tactical strategy. We stage a controlled ritual at Dover Street Workshop, with observers and safeguards. Lestrade's men will guard the perimeter. No ashes. No mirrors will leave the room. Delange and his men will be invited as official overseers in public guise to reveal their intentions. Abernathy will guide. Interpretation.Mary and Miss Venn remain at Baker Street, safe and unexposed. Holmes polished off his tea as he concluded. They wish enlightenment. We will offer them that, but under our terms. At dusk we assembled in the workshop. Gray skies pressed in from narrow windows. The table bore fresh chalk circles, the mirror, the codex open at dogmatic page. Fenton held a lantern dangling from a servant's chain. Abernathy stood closest to the mirror, cadre poised. Holmes stepped forward, voice steady. Gentlemen of Lumen Obscura, you are gathered here under permit to observe the final experiment and bear witness. If you intend harm, you will be momentarily illuminated. Delange's figure emerged from shadows gloved, but face wary. He bowed. I accept, Mr. Holmes, though I must remind you, transparency betrays power. Lestrade flanked the door, revolver. Strapped, back turned to us, Holmes guided the ritual. Reading passage aloud, I read, over mirror, collectively both us and Delange's men lights, lo. Observe any reflection or absence. Thereof. Record results silently on parchment. We followed his direction. As I read, the room thickened, the words echoing. Eyes sought reflection, met only blank glass. A hush fell. Delange inhaled, face taut. Holmes held his stare. No one recoiled. No one gasped. Only stillness. At last, Holmes reached the clause. When the mind's reflection refuses to respond, we are met with fear. He set the book aside. No mirror, no memory. Silence pressed. Delange's gloved hand lowered. Holmes stepped forward. Sir Peer, have you seen anything? Delange shook his head. Nothing but me. It did not resist? Holmes smiled tightly. That is our conclusion. He turned. Abernathy, how does the passage read? Abernathy read softly. Fear is the sentinel. It stands to guard the soul from harm. To remove it is folly. No memory should lack fear. He paused. Without fear, rational judgment fails. The assembly nodded. Delange swallowed. A curious dogma? Holmes answered. We offer illumination, but not erasure. Those who commit memory to mirror without fear risk damage. Holmes turned to Delange. You may take the codex, study it under condition of witness, but the mirror leaves London tonight. Delange nodded slowly. Holmes addressed Lestrade. Begin the record. Arrange transport. Lestrade did so. Holmes then stepped aside, away from ritual light, and addressed us. We have diffused their zeal, not by destruction, but by delivery of the truth. The codex now moves with transparency. They can study, but not evoke. At our return to Baker Street, the fog lifted slightly. Holmes locked the codex in its protective satchel again. He turned to Miss Benn. Your father's work is preserved. Protected. He would understand. She stepped forward. But will they misuse it? Holmes offered comfort. We have diminished their power, not obliterated the codex. It is not merely knowledge, it is precaution. Late that night, Holmes sat at his desk. I knelt beside him. Sugar again? He said, quietly offering tea. I poured. He gazed at the lead box. We began dismantling their network, he said at last. Abernathy, Hartright, and Fenton will supervise scholarly interpretation. Lestrade will monitor occult profiteers. Crawford will act as liaison between us. He sighed. Our work continues, but the fire in the empty room has been damped. He placed a hand on my arm. Tomorrow we plan how to return the codex to a place of safety. but only when I know its destiny. I nodded as he closed his eyes briefly. At peace. Chapter 11. The vault of memory, a fragile dawn crept over London, gilding Henrietta Street in pale, tentative gold. The night's tension lingered like a bruise on the city's skin. Every muted footfall, every sliver of fog seemed to whisper of secrets, weighing heavily on the mind. Holmes moved about Baker Street as though burdened with unseen weights, his usual brisk steps tempered, as if he carried that lead-wrapped satchel, and his thoughts before hands. Oblivious to the simmering tension, I watched him ease into a chair by the window, where the codex lay hidden in cloth. We gathered in the sitting room shortly after 8 o'clock. Present were Holmes, myself, Althea Venn, Sir Adrian Fenton, Professor Hartright, Dr. Marcus Abernathy, Inspector Lestrade, Mary Venn, bustling quietly with tea, and the ever-reserved Tobias Crawford. The fire flickered, and the air, despite warmth, felt taut as though each of us waited for a bell to toll. Holmes began with deliberate calm. Yesterday we saved the Umbra Codex from misuse. Now we must decide its destiny. The physical vessel is still in play. The question, where should it rest? He placed the lead-wrapped box on the table. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a silent emblem of what knowledge must. Sometimes bare. Minutes passed in contemplative hush before Fenton spoke first. I have connections at the Bodleian Library, a restricted vault beneath the main floor, originally for precious medieval manuscripts, inaccessible unless formally permitted and under archival covenant. Holmes inclined his head. An excellent proposition, institutional but discreet, the kind of place that, if left unmolested, remains untouched. Lestrade considered this. My department could provide watchful oversight. A sudden disappearance would raise alarms in minutes. But Hartright was less convinced. The Codex is academic treasure, but also dangerous instruction. Public libraries, even restricted, are visited. Too many pairs of eyes. Althea, her voice softer, yet firm, offered a different angle. Could it lie in a chapel's crypt? Out of sight, honored, but taboo? Fenton responded with concern. Religious vaults are not intended for scholarly material. Their seals fall outside public accountability. Holmes interjected. We need a combination academic sanctuary and consecrated oblivion. 2 keys, one physical, one symbolic. Abernathy, pen ready, voiced a nuanced solution. What of splitting custody? 2 vaults, each with its guardians, each holding oversight. Alternating custody, academic supervision under Fenton and Lestrade. Spiritual quiet under Althea and tradition. Crawford, usually quiet, added thoughtfully. That reflects what we learned in the crypt polarity. Reflection and memory, structure and silence. Holmes regarded him approvingly. Indeed, a carefully balanced polity of custody. By mid-afternoon, Holmes and I arrived at the Bodleian, a grand institution of vaulted ceilings, hushed corridors, and solemn librarians. Fenton and Hartright awaited in a side chamber, modern yet unassuming. Crawford and Mary stood by the door, witnessing the transfer. Holmes spoke to the head librarian, presenting the codex and the sealing instructions. The room smelled of old books, dust, and parchment. I watched as the librarian nodded, stepping aside to place the metal-wrapped volume within a steel-reinforced compartment. Holmes traced a finger along the seal. closing his eyes for a moment. It shall rest until needed. Later we moved by. Cab to a quiet church off Fleet Market Road. Gothic arches and stained glass framed a silent sanctuary where light pooled in dusty corners. Beneath, Holmes found the crypt. With precise control, he unlocked a simple iron door, revealing a cool, empty chamber of stone-arched niches, once used for village records, now rarely accessed. He selected a dark niche, removed the second key from his coat, and slid the codex wrapped again in lead cloth inside. He set a simple wooden board over it, marked the keyhole, and sealed it with wax. This, he said in the echoing gloom, is restrained by sand and stone, out of sight but not out of mind. By evening, as dusk fell outside Baker Street, a messenger arrived with a sealed envelope delivered by a Lestrade's office. Holmes noted the blurred inked monogram PD and sliced it open. The letter read, "Sir, the codex is secure. Lumen obscura dissolves, yet their ritual survives as potential that meaning, not placement, endangers. The codex remains both key and flame. You have detained the instrument, but not quelled the music. Farewell for now." Holmes folded the letter, expression tight but composed. He is perceptive. The danger lies not with the notebook itself, but with its ideas. Suppressing form does not extinguish concept. Althea's gaze flickered. So this can come again. Holmes laid a calming hand on her arm. Therefore we establish constant vigilance. Holmes looked around, eyes resting on each of us. Tomorrow, Sir Adrian will draft a neutral, scholarly report for both Bodleian oversight and ecclesiastical custody. Lestrade will patrol antique marketplaces, monitor occult collectors, and oversee any suspicious attempts to retrieve the codex. He turned to Fenton. You will arrange intellectual stewardship and inform necessary academic bodies when and only when release is warranted. Then Abernathy and Hartright, you will prepare an annotated, censored summary. Enough for historical and psychological discourse, but void of ritual enactment language, no doorways or mirror incitations. Althea, resolute, was entrusted with moral responsibility. You remain symbolic guardian memory, carries your father's legacy. Protect it. Crawford, slightly later. You will serve as liaison to any clients or institutions that request. Knowledge ensure they meet strict ethical vetting. That evening we gathered for a subdued supper humble, made by Mrs. Hudson, yet loaded with meaning. Holmes sat at the head, the codex absent, but looming in thoughts. I raised my glass to memory preserved in context, and to fire controlled within wisdom. Each of us drank some with relief, others with quiet resolve. Holmes smiled faintly. We have brokered peace between knowledge and power. Let us, for a while, enjoy its quiet. After dinner, Holmes and I walked Covent Garden. The lanterns glowed dim, vendors shuttering stalls. London felt softer tonight, less haunted. Yet I saw in Holmes's gait a soldier off the battlefield war-weary, vigilant. He said softly, "We have slowed the flame, but flames can smolder beneath ash. Someone someday may recover it. We must remain ready." I nodded. "I shall be vigilant, Holmes, as will others." He looked at me with thin-drawn satisfaction. "Then we have done well." At dawn, Holmes sat at his desk with an authority. Letter. Vault coordinates, key assignments and rotation, oversight duties, binding signatures from all involved. The parchment lay heavy with meaning. He added my signature with a steady hand and sealed it. This is the last visible step. Every future act lies beyond disclosure, into trust and remembrance. By midday, Lestrade called from his office. On Fleet Street, he reported that Delange had left London finally, and that 2 known associates were emigrating. No attempts at retrieving or copying the codex had been made in the preceding hours. Holmes surrendered to gentle repose in his chair, eyes closed, then quietly offered me tobacco. I handed it, and he resumed his pipe, contentment showing in a rare, slow smile. He murmured, "The storm has dissipated for now, but true calm emerges only when shadows retreat." Later that night, Holmes sat quietly by the fire. I approached and asked if he would join me in a final cup of tea. He nodded and invited me to sit. We sipped the brew in silence, the firelight dancing across the walls. Eventually, Holmes spoke. "Watson, our case had all elements: ritual, science, ambition, conscience, tragedy. The codex remains intact not by force, but by alliance." I answered quietly, "You have given it guardianship, not death." He raised his cup. To such guardianship we remain bound and to constant watch. I clasped mine to his. "Ever vigilant, Holmes." He set down the cup with a thoughtful finality. "Yes, Watson, always." Chapter 12, The Embers of Truth. Late afternoon light cast long shadows across Baker Street. Holmes, seated at his desk, gazed down at the memorandum that outlined the Codex's dual custody. His fingers traced the inked seals of the Bodleian and the chapel crypt, each signature a pledge of oversight and restraint. The fire's glow warmed the room, but Holmes's eyes remained cool, resolute. I settled in my chair, notebook open. This was our penultimate act to sweep, before the final curtain. A knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a figure I did not expect. Sir Adrian Fenton, hat in hand, his mustache unmistakably anxious. "Holmes," he said softly, hardly, pausing. "I have news." Holmes gestured to the chair. "Please, speak your mind." Fenton sat, lowering his gaze. In my greatest haste, I passed a copy of Venn's summary to Professor Langdon at Oxford. He requested insight for an upcoming symposium. He paused, discomfort visible. "I may have misjudged the sensitivity. Langdon writes that he intends to publish excerpts, despite knowing their danger." Holmes's jaw tightened. "That was not authorized." Fenton swallowed. "I acted in haste. I believed transparency essential, but I may have inadvertently given life back to diffuse the codex, and thus rekindle Lumen Obscura in another form." Althea, who had been visiting, caught Holmes's eye. She rose. "Holmes, is this our fault?" Holmes closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a deep breath. "A challenge, yes, but one we can still avert if we move quickly." Holmes spoke evenly. "We must determine exactly what Langdon published and take measures before public distribution." He turned to me. "Watson, review all correspondence to Langdon that Fenton sent. We need clarity." Fenton nodded, pale. Lestrade, listening from the door, stroked his chin. "If it's already gone to press, we may need to act formally objections through the University Press Board." Holmes rose. "We must precede those efforts. I will write to Langdon directly, under the guise of academic concern. I will cite the Codex's theoretical importance, not its ritual application. We offer consultation, not confrontation. As dusk approached, Holmes and I returned to Fenton's office in Bloomsbury. It was a small, book-lined room, smelling of scholarly ambition and ink. Holmes seated himself behind Fenton's desk and began drafting a letter. "Dear Professor Langdon," he wrote with clarity and calm. He offered confidential review, noting potential hazards in publishing extracts without oversight. The tone was respectful but firm. Holmes handed the letter over to Fenton. "Send this tonight, preferably by courier, marked urgent and personal." Fenton nodded, relief crossing his features. That evening found Holmes at his window again, staring across London rooftops as though watching for smoke signals. I wrote in my journal, the pen scratching. After a time, Holmes spoke without turning. "Watson, there is a slow burn on the horizon. Allow me a plan." I closed my notebook and looked at him. "We'll stop this too." At midnight, I awoke to the ringing of Holmes's private telephone, an unusual device for him. He answered quietly. "Langdon, I've received your response." "Understood. I shall proceed tomorrow." He clicked it off and slipped out of bed to dress. Surprise awaited me at breakfast when Holmes announced, "We leave for Oxford immediately. We must meet Langdon in person." Within the hour, we were aboard the afternoon train racing west. Holmes's concentration never wavered. I interpreted his expressions as movement through calculated steps. Arriving in Oxford, we headed directly to Christ Church, a cathedral and college rolled together. We found Langdon in his study, enthroned behind a mammoth desk cluttered with papers and Latin folios. He received us with cordiality, his features still red from apprehension. Holmes rose. "Professor Langdon, I trust you received my letter?" Langdon nodded solemnly. "Yes, I understand. I have regrettably sent the excerpts to print. Some philosophical sections removed ritual references, but some remained implicit." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Implicit references are the tinder that catch flame. What remains in the draft?" Langdon swallowed. "Pages on communal reflection, mirror symbolism, but I redacted the 5 risky ritual steps." Holmes nodded slowly, relief mingling with caution. "Very good. Permit me to read them to verify." Omission. "After this, I trust you will help me retract what remains." Holmes methodically scanned the draft. As he did, I noted Langdon's discomfort. Hand-in-hand dot at last, he closed the manuscript and leaned back. "The dangerous parts are gone. What remains is historical context and metaphor." Holmes nodded. "Thank you. Now we must ensure no public symposium or press publication proceeds without audit." He turned to me. "Watson, we record his pledge?" I pulled out my notebook. "Professor Langdon, will you commit to preventing distribution of any excerpt without my review?" Langdon grasped Holmes's hand. "Yes, I will withdraw everything until official clearance is granted." On the train home, Holmes and I discussed next steps. We have retrieved the codex and silenced the mirror. We have halted Langdon's draft. Holmes's voice soft. I had feared that even unintentional leakage might restart the cycle. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have steered us deftly." He smiled faintly. "It is why I rely on 2 minds working together, Watson." The next day we returned to Baker Street. Holmes convened a final council. Lestrade stood by the door. Althea, Fenton, Hartright, Abernathy, Crawford, and Mary gathered around. Holmes announced, "Professor, Langdon has retracted his excerpts. We now implement a formal embargo. No excerpt may be published without judicial or academic review. We proceed under relative normalcy, but watch closely." He looked each in the eye. "The codex remains sealed. The vaults remain guarded. The danger lingers as embers do, but for the moment smiths hold the fire." That evening we came together once more. Small supper, warm tea. Fenton raised his glass to our stewarded vigilance and to memory preserved. We drank slowly, gratitude and gravity in every taste. Holmes added softly, "We have signed enduring agreements. More may come, but for now we honor the balance between knowledge and responsibility." Late that night, Holmes sat by the fire, pipe in hand. I joined him with a final cup of tea. He gazed into the embers before responding. "Watson, we have done more than preserve a book. We have mapped the moral geography of its power. That is a greater triumph." He paused, then set down the cup. "But knowledge remains fluid. Idea proceeds to idea. So long as the Umbra Codex exists, so must watchfulness." I nodded. As we remain ready. Chapter 13. The quiet flame-silvered dawn yet lingered over Baker Street when Holmes silently opened the door to my room, invitation in hand. "Watson," he said quietly, "if you would join me for breakfast." The modest meal awaited us, porridge and tea and the calm before another London day, stirred to life beyond our windows. Double quotes this, he said as I sat, is the final step before publication of the sanitized codex summary. I have received Langdon's sealed commitment, but I wish our group to affirm it together. That afternoon, guests returned to 221B with measured solemnity. Althea Benstrong, yet still touched by loss, Sir Adrian Fenton, Professor Hartright, Dr. Abernathy, Inspector Lestrade, Crawford, Mary, and Tobias Crawford himself were present. Mrs. Hudson discreetly distributed tea, tension beneath calm. Smiles. Holmes stood at the fireplace, both codex vaults sealed and their keys entrusted. "We come together," he began, "to affirm that we will hold this knowledge responsibly. Be placed before us documents. The embargo agreement for Bodleian and Chapel, including key rotation and oversight. Academic non-disclosure, signed by Langdon with penalties for breach. Monitoring covenant assigning Lestrade follow-up. Althea spoke first, voice steady. "My father's father created the codex to preserve, not unleash. We pledge to uphold that intention." Sir Adrian added, "As historian and steward, I swear to remain in academic context only." Professor Hartright affirmed, "I vow not to use it for personal or professional gain." Dr. Abernathy said, "I swear to prohibit ritual misuse under my watch." Lestrade pledged diligence and oversight. Crawford and Mary joined their voices, stillness solemn, unity unspoken but present. Holmes concluded, "So long as these statements stand, the codex may rest safely." He closed the gathered documents and pressed a final seal. That evening, Holmes and I walked again under lamplight. Baker Street hushed and fogged. He handed me his cane, a gesture of stepping back. "Take this, Watson. I find peace only in shared responsibility." I held it respectfully. "Then your burden is lighter." Holmes turned serious. "But not gone?" The codex remains an ember, restrained. He paused. Tell me, Watson, do you think it ends here? I considered the empty street. No, but now it is contained, watched, and remembered. That is the beginning, not the end. He nodded, as though comforted by my words. 3. A final whisper that night. Holmes sat by the fire long after I left his chair. Morning tea remained. At his elbow, I found him alone and joined him quietly. He handed me a single letter unfolded, its wax seal broken. My breath caught as I read, Mr. Holmes, the mirror may be shattered, but its pieces reflect beyond your walls. Expect interest in Berlin, Paris, Calcutta. Your vigilance must be global. Know, too, that truth cannot be sealed forever. A. Friend Holmes folded the note without comment, but with a shadow felt by both of us. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Holmes, pipe ash already forming, invited me to address the Times a brief announcement. The codified summary of the Umbra Codex will now be released for scholarly review, purged of ritual incitement. The original manuscript remains under secure custody, overseen by academic and ecclesiastical authorities, with law enforcement monitoring private usage. Signed unanimously. Holmes handed it to me. I sent it. Weeks passed. Life resumed its balanced hum. Holmes resumed chemistry and violin. Lestrade resumed homicide. Hartright resumed Tacit Bride. Miss Venn pursued gentle historic research. Crawford offered discreet counsel. I recorded it all mindful. One evening, Holmes and I dined quietly. He lit his pipe, considered the hearth. Watson, he began softly, our fire burned with potential to illuminate and to destroy. We did not snuff it, but we contained it. He paused. I have returned the Codex not to obscurity, but to memory. A living memory, guarded, known, revered, never forgotten. I nodded. And that may be its greatest legacy. Months later, I encountered Fenton at the Bodleian vault. He confided that new historical research required codex reference, reviewed under oversight. 2 days later, Dr. Abernathy published a scholarly piece on symbolic reflection in Victorian mysticism. Well received, harmless. Still, somewhere in shadows the embers remained. Holmes and I remained silent custodians. Now, Holmes and I stood before the fireplace again. He turned to me. Another case calls. I raised an eyebrow. He smiled that narrow, quizzical grin. In Paris, a dancer whose laughter summons shadows. But we leave this fire behind until its flame reignites. I succumbed to his quiet confidence. Then to Paris, Holmes? To Paris. The Umbra Codex remained locked, its embers quiet, yet its presence a warning that knowledge must be handled with wisdom and unity. The society's rituals faded, but never disappeared. The book remained under vigilant watch, never to be unleashed without purpose. Holmes had proven once more that the truest triumph lay not in victory over a scroll, but in forging a covenant of guardianship. The fire in the empty room had been contained not by ignorance nor by destruction, but by the sustained integrity of those who understood its weight. And so Watson's narrative ends on the edge of dusk and dawn, hope and vigilance, echo and silence. For the shadows of knowledge cannot vanish entirely. They can only be held close, whisked by the most careful souls to guide the world, not. Burn at dot, Chapter 14. The final ember ray, damp hush, settled over London as Holmes and I stepped from from Baker Street into the quiet pre-dawn air. The city was still under the weight of a moonlit vigil. This, the final act in our long struggle over the Umbra Codex. Holmes carried only his cane and coat. The Codex remained securely vault-sealed, its presence a silent testimony to all that had come before. We made our way to Sir Adrian Fenton's chambers, where leather-bound tomes and open notebooks lay awaiting our arrival. Inside, Fenton held a dispatch from Professor Langdon, sealed yet open in anticipation. The professor's words were direct but respectful. "Dear Mr. Holmes, enclosed is the approved report, fully redacted and deemed safe for academic release. The Royal Occult Chronicle stands in support. Please accept my assurance. Further excerpts will be withheld pending oversight." Holmes read thoughtfully, then nodded. "They have exercised restraint. The remaining danger lies not in what is known, but in what remains unwritten." He handed the letter to Fenton. "Send word to Lestrade. Today we finalize." Later that day, Inspector Lestrade Fenton and I oversaw discreet deliveries of codified summaries to trusted academic bodies. Each parcel bore seals from Bodleian and Althea Venn's ecclesiastical authority, accompanied by binding agreements. The goal was not sensationalism, but measured knowledge. Holmes stood by as the final envelope was marked. "Knowledge must advance under watch, not in darkness," he said softly. Lestrade, ever practical, smiled. "We will keep an eye on that." Lantern. That evening, a letter arrived on Holmes's desk, unsealed and anonymous. The words were faint, typed quickly. "The ember may be tamed, but the ashes drift across oceans. Berlin, Paris, Calcutta. This is not the end." Holmes folded the paper slowly. "It appears we are not the only watchers," I offered comfort. "We anticipated this possibility." Holmes nodded. "Indeed. That is why we proceed with both caution and clarity." Our final breakfast at 221B was subdued yet bright. Holmes placed his teacup down. "Watson, our task is ending, but our journey continues." I responded with quiet conviction. Wherever that ember moves, it carries our charge with it. He studied me for a long moment, then finally smiled. "Then let us be its guardians, always vigilant, always ready." Holmes and I walked through London's awakening streets. He paused outside a church, hands behind him. "The Codex remains molested by neither ignorance nor misuse. But knowledge, as fluid it flows like water." I looked at him. "And in the right hands nourishes." He returned my gaze. "In the right hands, yes, and ours will remain among those." That afternoon, Holmes prepared his small valise, no trunk, no fanfare, only essentials. I observed him packing, feeling both pride and the pang of conclusion. He folded a letter from a French correspondent, a dancer in Paris whose laughter draws shadows across her stage. "A new case?" I prompted. He simply nodded. "Let us go, Watson." At the carriage, Althea Venn appeared unexpectedly. She took Holmes's hand, pressing a small box into it. "For your journey, may it protect you from darkness." Holmes opened it. A delicate silver talisman, engraved with a crowned serpent cocooning an open book. He looked deeply at her. "Thank you. Its symbolism is not lost on me." She stepped back, giving him a gentle smile. "Safe travels and thank you." We rode off as day brightened, Hornblower's carriage crunching along wet cobbles. Holmes leaned forward. eyes fixed on the road. He glanced at the talisman, then at me. Let this be our final ember guidance, not fire, a mark that we are ever watchful. I placed a hand on his arm. Always Holmes. The autumnal haze of London parted slowly as we traveled southward. The Codex was behind us, but not forgotten, sealed, safeguarded, and swathed in just enough obscurity to quiet dangerous curiosity. Holmes leaned his chin into his gloved fingers, eyes focused beyond the coach window. His gaze was uncharacteristically far away. "You're thinking of the note," I said. He turned to me with a wry smile. "I'm thinking of its implications. For every flame we extinguish, another may flicker into life elsewhere. But that is not cause for despair. It is a call for vigilance." I nodded. And who better than you to answer it? Back at Baker Street, we returned to our old rhythms. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with her usual blend of curiosity and complaint. "The post is piling up again. Mr. Holmes." That ghastly Baron von Kleist sent another parcel clinking glass bottles, and no return. Address. I daren't touch it. Holmes chuckled and waved her concern aside. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Do not fear Watson will bravely open it." "Me?" I exclaimed, but Holmes had already turned to the fireplace dot as I cautiously opened the parcel, which turned out to be rare Hungarian absinthe. Holmes drew a thin notebook from beneath the violin case dot. It was his case journal, and he was making new notes. "You're not retiring after all, are you?" I asked. Holmes looked up, the glint of mischief in his eye. "Retirement is for men without shadows, Watson. I have far too many." That very evening, Lestrade arrived unannounced. His mustache was as bristly as ever, and he held his bowler hat tightly in both hands. "Holmes, Watson, I just came from the Diogenes Club. My superiors asked me to deliver a commendation, though unofficial." He passed Holmes a small sealed envelope bearing the wax insignia of the Home Office. Holmes accepted it without expression and set it aside unopened. "I assume you didn't brave the drizzle for that alone," Holmes said. Lestrade cleared his throat. "There was a fire in Bethnal Green, old bookshop burned to the ground. Nothing left but ashes and one thing." He pulled out a scorched object wrapped in cloth. Holmes unwrapped it. A single silver page. A fragment of the Codex, charred, but legible. Holmes' brow tightened. "So it begins?" Lestrade gave a short nod. "If there's more of that thing out there, we'll need you." For several days no cases came. Holmes took long walks alone through the city, disappearing for hours into the fog. I found him once near the Serpentine, watching swans glide over still water. "You expect something," I said quietly. He didn't look away. "No, I anticipate it. A spark is never alone. It comes from friction. And there is always friction. In the minds of men, I didn't press further. He would speak when he was ready." 1 week later, on a still and silent night, a woman arrived at Baker Street. She was tall, with a pale scarf wound tightly around her face. Her gloves were immaculate, but her coat was travel-stained. She did not give her name. "I come on behalf of someone you have not yet met," she said. "But you soon will. He requests an audience and offers knowledge in return." Holmes didn't flinch. "And if I decline?" Her reply was simple. "He will find you anyway." She left behind only a card with a single symbol, a serpent, encircling a flame. When she was gone, Holmes turned to me. Another ember, Watson. In his study, Holmes penned the final entry in the casebook. The matter of the Umbra Codex is settled, but not ended. Like a stone cast into still water, its ripples may touch unseen shores. I remain, as ever, its sentinel. He closed the book and placed it carefully in the locked drawer beneath his desk dot. As he turned to me, I asked him the question that had lingered in my heart. Do you ever grow tired of it, Holmes? The shadows? The burden? He looked thoughtful for a moment, then said, There is clarity in solving what others cannot. It is not the darkness that burdens me, Watson. It is the silence of an unanswered question. Then he poured himself a brandy, struck a match to the hearth, and took up his violin. The soft notes drifted into the night, haunting a beautiful dot outside. The fog coiled like breath from some unseen thing, and so we waited patiently, faithfully, for the next spark.